I am very aware that I had a very traditional social mobility experience, i.e. I came from the working class background, I did well at school, I got good grades, and that has kind of leveraged me to universities and then to jobs in this, like moving to central London and stuff like that. But I do feel, and for a long time I held that view that that's what social mobility had to look like. I personally had two big takeaways, and I think the first was really around this importance of keeping evidence at the core of education interventions. Obviously, the EEF evidence is its bread and butter, and making sure that the education sector is kind of using evidence in the right way to support the students who need it the most. Maintaining quality and fidelity to evidence in scale up is a difficult challenge. And for example, we know that some schools and tutoring organisations perhaps would have preferred a bit more flexibility around certain aspects of the programme design. But because the programme was designed based on what we know works in tutoring interventions, and that can be supported by the global evidence base, it just really reinforces the idea to me that it's incredibly important to start by grounding things in evidence, but then building in like necessary flexibility when implementing kind of at scale or at pace.
Hello and welcome to the Qualified Tutor podcast, the podcast that brings you the latest in the world of tutoring, edtech and education, and hopefully inspires in you the big change that each and every one of us is capable of. Qualified Tutor is an industry-leading tutor training organisation and online tutoring community for thousands of tutors around the world. This podcast is the voice of this community, where we aim to hear from tutors, teachers, entrepreneurs, coaches, business experts, students, tutorpreneurs, and more from the world of tutoring about what inspires them every day, how they can help tutors like you, and what they've learnt about tutoring along the way. The question is, what will you learn today? Hello and welcome to the 129th episode of the Qualified Tutor podcast. My name is Ludo Miller, the host of this podcast. Welcome back to regular listeners. Welcome to any of you for whom this is your first time listening to the Qualified Tutor podcast. And of course, a huge welcome to today's guest, Liberty King. Liberty, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Liberty is a former English teacher and also has an MEd in international education policy, which focused a little bit on social and educational inequality. And over the last couple of years as well, has combined all of that with her role as former role as tutoring liaison and program manager at the National Tutoring Programme, of which our audience, I'm sure, is been engaging with at least to some degree over the last couple of years, and perhaps is continuing to do so to this day. And kind of combine that role with her position at the Education Endowment Foundation, to whom we Qualified Tutor owe much of our pedagogy and practice to the EEF, wonderful resource and research organisation there. Liberty is currently a senior strategy consultant at Cairn-Eagle, which is a consultancy firm that specialises in the education and in the kind of edtech sector. So a rich background, past and present in the education sector. So there's a lot for us to learn from someone with your experience and your insights, Liberty. So lucky me and lucky you, dear listeners, today. But Liberty, thank you for coming on to the podcast. I know you have a very busy schedule, so we've been able to find a moment or two in and amongst that to bring you on to record. But regular listeners will know that we have a segment that we use to find out a little bit more about our guests at the start of each episode. So Liberty, I gather that being able to locate some old school reports was not necessarily possible, but there's a general kind of tendency is there that you remember from teachers' feedback. Is that right?
Yeah, that's funny. My mum has just managed to send through some old school reports, but I said to her, like, I need something like that's quite amusing or like highlights how I was at school. And she says, her text to me just now is, "There's literally no amusing tales. You were always so well behaved." So she just thinks I'm very uninteresting at school. But all the reports that she sent through for when I was in primary, but I do remember in secondary school, it was kind of a similar theme, really. I was, I kind of liked school, got on well at school, but I did tend to get in trouble a bit when I was older for talking a bit too much in class. I think I'm sort of a very work hard, play hard kind of person, so would always work hard in class and kind of do my best, but I also liked chatting to my friends and being silly in the corner of the classroom with my like 3 or 4 best mates. So that's what I remember consistently from secondary school, but it seems like when I was at primary school I was very much just wanting to impress all the teachers all the time from these reports. One saying she likes to be noticed and achieves this by putting enormous amount of effort into everything. She's always very polite and helpful. Yeah, I think I was always a bit of a teacher's pet when I was a bit younger. Yeah.
That feeds a little bit into your why then, Liberty. I mean, would you say that you have a why, and if so, what would that be?
I would say I have a why, and I think probably that does feed into my why. Actually, saying that my why is certainly, and for a long time has been to strive to kind of inspire people to push beyond perceived limitations, and I think I'm very keen to make sure that everybody is like aware of how far they can go and has the confidence to like push for that as well. And I think perceived limitations very very consciously. I use that word specifically because I think limitations are often put on people by others because of how people perceive them due to their background or their abilities or whatever. But I also think that limitations often come from within as well. And a lot of people put limitations on themselves and don't strive for certain things or go down a certain path because they just think that it's not for them or that's for someone else, that's not for me. So I think my why is certainly to help people reach beyond those perceived limitations, both from other people's perceptions of them and their perceptions of themselves.
Yeah. And that is a huge part of the work that you have done for a number of years. And that came from, obviously your master's was focused on social and educational inequality. Mm-hmm. I mean, how have you come to work in driving social mobility through education then, Liberty? How has that come to be kind of the large part of the work you do?
It starts really with my own experience in life. So I come from a traditionally working class background. For a number of years at secondary school, we were eligible for free school meals. And I did very well in my GCSEs. I worked very hard at school. And like, as I was saying earlier, I was a bit of a teacher's pet, but it also meant that I ended up getting very good grades at GCSE. And my mum kind of noticed this in me from like probably from a young age, but from my early teens, she really was pushing me to saying that I could do X, Y, and Z. I could go to university, I could go to Oxford or Cambridge. And I didn't know anybody that had been to university when I was younger. No one in my family had been. None of our kind of family friends had been to university. Like, it wasn't commonplace for people that we knew to go to university. And so for just before sixth form, kind of a year before when I was in year 10, my mum saw an advert in a local newspaper for a private school that was sort of in our county. So it was in Buckinghamshire, which is next to Milton Keynes, which is where I grew up. And they said in that advert that they had scholarships and bursary options. And so she contacted them and told them about the kind of grades that I was getting. And then I was invited to interview and take some exams, etc. And the long story short was that I got into this private boarding school for sixth form, which was really a life-changing moment, because I was surrounded by a completely different peer group. I had a very different educational experience. I mean, the fees to go to this school were annually more than my mum earned in a year. So it was definitely an eye-opening experience. But I think what it really highlighted to me was the difference in opportunity that is available to people based on their income and their family income. And I obviously feel very lucky that I was able to experience that for sixth form in the 2 years. And I do think that going there probably played a large part into why I was able to obtain a place to Oxford for my undergrad. I'm not sure if I would have got into Oxford had I stayed at the States where I was at, I don't know, but because I know that I got an immense amount of support at this private boarding school in interview prep and reading through personal statements and just the kind of having smaller class sizes when I was in sixth form and having resources that I just had never even realised were resources that you could get in the education system. So all of that stuff, I think, really sparked this fire in me to make sure that those kind of opportunities are not just preserved for a few and are more accessible to people from a range of backgrounds.
That's a story that will resonate with a few people very powerfully, I think, and with a lot of people very in a kind of equally emphatic sense. I think that's a story we hear a lot, isn't it? In the education sphere is the imbalance between what people are able to achieve in education and therefore in later life, just by where they live, their geography and their parents' earning power, that kind of thing. I want to talk a little bit about the National Tutoring Programme, of course, because it's very important to the tutoring sector at the moment, and is something that you have been involved with to a certain degree. What can you tell us a little bit about what you learnt from that first year of the NTP that you worked in, and what that tells us about education in this country?
I think I had two big takeaways really from that, working on that kind of initial setup and design of the NTP in year one. I mean, I know it's evolved quite a bit since we initially worked on it at the EEF, but I personally had two big takeaways, and I think the first was really around this importance of keeping evidence at the core of education interventions. Obviously, the EEF evidence is its bread and butter, and making sure that the education sector is kind of using evidence in the right way to support the students who need it the most. And the NTP was really a significant accomplishment to design a programme that was grounded in evidence, but was also appropriate for different sectors of the tutoring market, and that was seen in the fact that we had applications from a huge range of companies and charities and non-profit organisations, local authorities, school groups, universities. But I think maintaining quality and fidelity to evidence in scale up is a difficult challenge. And for example, we know that some schools and tutoring organisations perhaps would have preferred a bit more flexibility around certain aspects of the programme design. But because the programme was designed based on what we know works in tutoring interventions, and that can be supported by the global evidence base, it just really reinforces the idea to me that it's incredibly important to start by grounding things in evidence, but then building in like necessary flexibility when implementing kind of at scale or at pace, and ensuring that these adaptations are made iteratively through feedback from data and from the sector, and making sure of constantly having that conversation with the sector, so that it's not just, okay, we're just going to implement this and that's it. We just did it based on the evidence and that's what we're going to do, because the programme actually changed quite a lot throughout the first year because of feedback that we received, because of the data that we were seeing. But starting by grounding it in that evidence base was crucial. And then I think the second big takeaway that I learned from working on the NTP in the first year was really around, and hopefully the listeners of this podcast will appreciate this, the commitment of the tutoring sector that exists in this country. So I knew of the kind of impact that tutoring could have based on the EEF's evidence, when it was implemented correctly, how it can be a very high impact intervention in addition to classroom learning. But my understanding of the impact of tutoring was really the scientific kind of understanding. But then it was really kind of brought to life for me in that when we had the application round and we had just under 400 applications. And it was so heartwarming to see the whole sector really rally around this programme, especially as it was something that had never been done before. And it just really proved to me and showed me how committed the tutoring sector is in this country to improving outcomes for students.
So did you take, I mean, obviously you mentioned there that this was an admittedly ambitious and kind of pioneering project. I mean, what basis did you have for designing the programme like you did? Were there international case studies that you'd seen, or was it really just off the back of years of the EEF understanding one-to-one and small group practice?
So this was really a programme that had never been done before in this way. There had been similar kind of tutoring interventions in other countries or in our country that we had tested, and that either we had tested or that we have the kind of evidence from other studies that have been done. So a lot of the core facets of the National Tutoring Programme in Year 1, for example, having a 15-hour sustained block, preferably having it in one subject, ideally having it one-to-one, but understanding that cost is a factor. So 1 to 3 is a kind of compromise where you're not going to be sacrificing the quality, but it's more accessible to people and to schools. All of those kind of designs of the programme were based on what the evidence has showed us can have the highest impact in tutoring interventions. So that is taken from global research and also research that the EEF had done themselves.
Yeah, it was. It's, you know, whatever has come of the NTP, and I don't necessarily think this is the space to discuss kind of all of the logistics of it and the implementation, the design of that, and the fact that it was rolled out in the time period that it was, will always be an incredible feat, and can form the basis of similar designs in years to come. I mean, obviously the NTP is not ending at the end of this year. It's continuing on in whatever guise. So it can still take the foundations of what the EEF designed. But, I mean, obviously you no longer work for the EEF, and I'm sure that some of your team members at the same time have moved on, but was the general feeling that at the end of that first year, the system had been successful? It had achieved what it had set out to achieve?
It's hard to answer that question because it kind of implies that there's an end point. The evaluation of the impact of the NTP is still ongoing, as I understand. And I think the impact of something this big is hopefully something that is also ongoing. In terms of achieving what was the kind of base numbers to achieve, for example, funding and enough organisations that could deliver tutoring to enough students and those kind of like high level numbers, I suppose, yes, that was achieved. But I'm hesitant to say first year everything was achieved. We did what we needed to do, because I think the answer to that is that it is ongoing, and the point is that education is something where the rewards of the work you put in now are seen for those young people in years to come. But at the base of it, tutoring was delivered to hundreds of thousands of students across the country, and so I would say that was certainly an achievement for the first year.
Yeah, especially given all that you had to contend with, and the fact that each of you individually was you know, as individuals who designed the program, was living through your own stresses and anxieties of a pandemic. So yeah, I mean, just kind of turning, you know, the sights from evaluation of past programs to what you want to see Liberty, you know, kind of looking into the future. Are there, you'll be involved, I assume, in social mobility in some to some degree for several years to come. Are there particular developments, or even what developments would you like to see in educational and social mobility in the next kind of 5 years or so? Is if I allow you to dream big, Liberty, what are some of the things that you predict we may see?
Well, I don't know what we may see, but I know what I'd like to see, so I'll answer that. I've actually been kind of re-evaluating my stance on social mobility and what it means for quite a while now. And I think obviously my experience of social mobility and educational equality was very much from my own experience of education and then working as a teacher, so still very school-based. I think now that I've been kind of stepped away from the school-focused side of it and more into the work side of it, I mean, obviously the kind of one of the main purposes of education is to support people to become functioning members of society and get good jobs so that they can sustain a lifestyle, etc. And so I think my understanding of social mobility is now being not challenged, but it's now being reframed to what that means in the workplace and how we can kind of make that transition from education to the workplace for people. And I think one of the main things that I would like to see in the next 5 years in education and social mobility generally is actually kind of, and I suppose challenge is the right word to use here, is challenging our like kind of traditional view of what social mobility looks like. I am very aware that I had a very traditional social mobility experience, i.e. I came from the working class background, I did well at school, I got good grades, and that has kind of leveraged me to universities and then to jobs in this, like moving to central London and stuff like that. But I do feel, and for a long time I held that view that that's what social mobility had to look like. We had to find these kind of bright working class kids and support them to get to the top universities and making sure that that was all equal as far as it could be. But now I've kind of started to question that, and I've started to think, well, maybe that shouldn't be the case, because I was lucky to do well at school. I mean, I don't want to say that it was just luck. Like, I obviously worked hard, but I was lucky in the sense that, for example, I had a mother who advocated for me very heavily and supported me at school, and I didn't have sort of adverse experiences to the point where that impacted my ability to perform well at school and to do my exams in the way that I could. And I think, having worked in the school when I did the Teach First programme, for example, I was working with children that some of them have incredibly difficult home lives. And so doing well at school is not often their priority, or it's not something they're able to put all of their thought into because they have other stuff going on. And so I think it's almost the onus is on the kind of the work sector as a whole, businesses, universities, to really challenge what they're looking for in candidates, because I think a lot of companies and a lot of barriers to getting into high performing jobs is, for example, they will ask for a university degree, but I think there needs to be some questioning about why that is. What is it that a university degree can demonstrate about someone's ability that you can't potentially measure through some other way? Because I don't think that going through this traditional get good grades at school, go to university is indicative of somebody being able to contribute to your company and to where you work. So I think it's really about reframing this view of what social mobility should look like. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be doing those things. I still think there's a lot of good interventions. There's plenty of charities and companies that are doing very good things in making these traditional routes of social mobility more accessible to people. And that's very important, and we should continue doing that. But I also think there needs to be a conversation about reframing how we view social mobility and thinking, well, maybe there's actually other routes into the workplace that don't follow this very traditional route. And you can see it with apprenticeships becoming far more commonplace, and I think that kind of stuff is starting to take hold. But the conversation, I think, is still very early days.
Thank you, Liberty. That was a really articulate portrayal of where social mobility can go. And as I'm sure many listeners and yourself perhaps are aware as well, Liberty, the word social mobility does mean different things to different people. It obviously is relative where people are able to be mobile and in what direction. So, I guess that word is thrown about a lot, and that's a very refreshing look at it, to see it not just being the clever working class child making it to Oxbridge. And also a little insight there, perhaps, into the next 5 years of Liberty King, is that's where you'll be headed. And now a brief word from last week's guest, Matthew Curnier.
I don't think I ever realised the extent to which Qualified Tutor podcast and everything that the Qualified Tutor team does extends throughout the tutoring field and the tutoring industry, sort of linking tutors up with families, with agency professionals, with other educators and practitioners. I really loved the fact that there was this hub, and sort of feels like, the links and the thread between all of the various disparate groups of people is Qualified Tutor. So that was fantastic to see. What did I enjoy about being a guest on the podcast? Well, simply that Ludo is a very warm and generous host, and just makes you feel right at home. So it was fantastic to be in conversation with him. And finally, if you're thinking about going on and you're sort of a little bit on the fence about it, there's only one way to jump. Absolutely go and do it. It's just absolutely superb.
Before I presuppose your answer to that, and just kind of bringing this conversation, this episode to a close here, because we must respect our listeners' attention spans. We're coming to the end of the 25 minutes or so there, but we love to finish these episodes by asking our guests what's next for them, personally, predominantly, but also aware that personally can tie in with our guests' professional lives. But what's next for you, Liberty? What's next for Liberty King?
I suppose going off the back of what I was saying about this kind of reframing this view of what social mobility should look like. One of my roles is that I am on the board for a social enterprise called Good Work, we're really trying to challenge this way of how companies are recruiting their early career talent. And we're in the process of kind of developing our pilot program, getting young people onto a 6-month internship where we sort of front load some workplace training with them, and then they have a sort of a 6-month internship with a company that is London based. And the hope is that we'll grow Good Work to eventually run advisory services, and also just generally advocate to make early careers fairer, more inclusive, and more meaningful for everyone. So I do think the next 5 years, I'm very excited to be on the board for that and see where Good Work is going to go in the next 5 years. It's being run by a very amazing woman called Felicity, who is doing a great job of setting up the pilot program with the support of the board. So yeah, I'm excited to see where that will go, because it's very much early stages.
Yeah, well, how exciting to be involved in a project like that from such an early stage. Obviously, the work you did at EEF and as part of the NTP was all about pioneering that program and setting the groundwork for what was to come later. So that's clearly a talent of yours, Liberty. Liberty, thank you so much for joining us. I feel very lucky to have been able to interview on someone who's so involved in some of the most kind of cutting edge social mobility work in the UK. You're certainly one to watch. So listeners, if Liberty is someone that you'd like to keep up with and to kind of check in with, then you can always connect with Liberty on LinkedIn, of course. But Liberty, if they want to get in touch with you any other way, what's the best way for someone listening in today to get in touch with you if they have anything they want to discuss, or if they want to kind of fire any questions your way?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is the best route, to be honest. I'm on LinkedIn almost every day, so I pick up messages. Pick up messages quite easy. So yeah, happy to have a conversation with anybody who's interested to chat. I'm always happy to talk, as my teachers would have told you.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to sort of nerd out, then I'm sure Liberty would be happy to oblige. So, Liberty, thank you very, very much. I hope you listeners were able to take something from that. And Liberty, I hope you enjoyed talking a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you, Ludo. I really enjoyed that conversation.
That's really my pleasure. So, listeners, next week will be the 130th episode, so a little bit of a milestone there, and do check in for that. We've got a really exciting episode to come next week as well. But Liberty, for one final time, thank you very much, and we'll speak again soon.
Thank you very much.
Okay, cheerio then.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Qualified Tutor Podcast. Whether you're a regular listener of this podcast or you've just stumbled across it, join the Qualified Tutor Podcast group within the Qualified Tutor community to stay up to date with our latest news, offers, workshops, and of course, simply to meet other tutors like you. Whatever your level as a tutor, our training courses will be the next step in your professional development. Visit qualifiedtutor.org/training to find out more about our CPD accredited and Ofqual recognised courses, the first of their kind in the tutoring industry. Your student deserves the best tutor possible. Make that happen today by joining Qualified Tutor.